walking down the street yesterday with my child,
when he's gone.
just outside of the church actually. She asked me about this man walking just in front of us. "Mama, is that an old man?" And I said, "Yes, I believe it is." And she said, "Is he getting ready to go to heaven?" And my child, I think at this time, was not having any sound discretion at all, so I'm sure he heard this. And I said, "Yeah, I guess he probably is at some point too." And embarrassed as I was in this moment, there was something quite real about her question that I think a lot of us ask. The question of who gets to stay and who goes and when, and the wonderment of what is and what is to be, and who gets to go to heaven, is one of the most controversial questions in all of Christendom. And people who love to make determinations about who will and won't go to heaven, particularly those who see that number being a lot smaller than those who don't get to go, they have a tendency to love to quote the book of Revelation. Which is why for the first few years of my ministry, I never touched it. It was a book I was actually afraid of. But then I decided that it was not necessarily responsible as a pastor to have an entire book of the Bible. Actually, there are a few I don't like, but I thought maybe it's not the best idea to have a really important one be something that I didn't engage. So I started learning about it and learning what it means to take Revelation seriously. And here's the thing about difficult texts that make very serious pronouncements about God's wrath and God's furor that you'll see all over Revelation and in some other places, particularly in the apocalypses, is that it's meant as a corrective. In other words, the harsh words of Scripture are never meant to sit on their own, but rather must be coupled with the promises that come after the harsh words. And every time you see some pronouncement where it seems really rough, it is always followed by the pronouncement of God's promises and love, everywhere in the Scriptures. And what happens, though, is that a lot of times when people proof text or decide what they want to say about some people or to tell us what's wrong with them, they only focus on the corrective and forget about the calling back in. And so these words that seem to be pretty tough in Scripture are actually meant to say, here's what you could do to make God happy with your actions. But even when you don't, God still loves you. After the correction, there was always the promise. And what you have in the text today from Revelation 21 is just that. That God is going to wipe away every tear from our eyes. That death, dying, and mourning will be no more, and that the home of God will not be in some far-off place, but actually amongst mortals. That those first things that we have come to know, which are things like pain and death and dying, have passed away. And in this gorgeous promise, God calls us back home and brings us back from the brink. And I truly believe that that promise isn't just for some who know how to say certain words of Scripture or certain promises on their own, but that that promise is actually for everyone. And God's approval certainly takes quite a lot of corrective work on our part. But God's promises endure even through our mistakes. And what I love about the revelation of John is that it promises that a day will come when the only thing we actually know will be God's justice. All of these first things, all of the trouble, all of the oppression, where powers and principalities will hold on to what they have so the rest of us can't share in it, all of those days will come to an end. And God's people will live free from pain, free from lies, free from anyone's control. And that's God's intent for the whole wide world. So we don't need to trip over who's in and who's out, because the truth is this: God is all in. Amen.